This episode is to be treated like an add-on to the last episode on haunted pubs and inns. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, just go back one and give that a listen and then come back and join us. After the last episode, after I'd finished editing and adding background music and so on and just polishing it all up, I received an email from the owner of the Fleece Inn in Elland in the UK. If you remember last week's episode, the Fleece Inn was the first pub I had spoken about. Basically, what had happened, I had contacted the Fleece Inn and asked if they had any more details that I could use for last week's show, but I didn't notice that the email had arrived until the episode was finished, and this email had a lot more information on the Fleece Inn. The lady who sent me the email is called Christine. She's the owner of the Fleece, and she's been keeping an ongoing record of all the activity that has happened at the pub right up until 2019. This is her own personal record, so it's hard to come by on the internet, so I'm very grateful to her for sending it to me. So I thought I'd record this episode and give you a bit more of an in-depth report on the Fleece Inn, because if there's one thing I hate doing is leaving out facts and information on one of my episodes. So we're going to take a step back and we're going to revisit the Fleece Inn. And this is all in Christine's own words, as I'm going to be reading directly from the email that she sent me. And Christine, if you're listening, thanks very much for the informative email. I appreciate it a lot, and I'm sure my listeners do too. Okay, I'm just opening up the email now. If you hear some clicking or scrolling through the episode, that's just my mouse, which is right next to my microphone. So without further ado, let's get started. Oh, wait, I almost forgot. It wouldn't quite be the same, would it, if we didn't have a little bit of spooky music playing in the background. So here you go. On the 24th of April 1964, the local newspaper of the time, the Halifax Weekly Courier and Guardian, ran a feature on the Fleece Inn. This article gives a unique insight into the building before the major demolition, renovation, modernisation, alterations and extensions to the Fleece Inn took place. The then landlord Edmund Bentham, 1949 to 1965, and his wife Elizabeth gave their own personal spin on the history and legends of the building and relay some of their own experiences. The title of this report is called Ghosts. Eerie noises in the night don't disturb their slumber, but why do they happen? The ancient Fleece Inn in Elland is a house of mystery. To look around the hostelry is like taking a peep into life 200 years ago. This is the place to go if you enjoy a good ghost story, for there are many tales of unusual happenings there. Go there too if you want to hear the gruesome story of a murder, or the time when Nazi von Ribbentrop drank ale in the parlour. A secret passage is another of the Fleece's mysterious attractions, though the entrance to it is now hidden. And what about the listening hole, a peeping Tom device used to get in on secret conversations? The history of the Fleece has spread throughout the world. A visitor's book kept by the licensee, Mr. Edmund Bentham, has signatures of callers from a dozen countries. Background information about the pub is hard to find, but Mr. Bentham told me that the construction of the building took place in stages. He says the oldest part is said to date from about 1590, and the most recent addition is dated around 1610. Once it was called the Great House, and its use as an inn can be traced back 200 years. Inside there are many treasures. The men-only room, with mullioned windows like the rest of the building, contains many curios, and looks now just as it must have done a century ago. Some of the windows still have their original glass, and upstairs some of the rooms are panelled with hand-carved oak. Built into the bottom of one of the several staircases is the trunk of a tree, and it is on this very staircase that evidence of a macabre kind is to be found, bloodstains and blood-covered handprint of a man. Sherlock Holmes will be in his element here, but the mystery of the blood has been solved long ago. It belonged to a traveller who was murdered at the inn many years ago. Mrs. Elizabeth Bentham, the licensee's wife, showed me the upstairs room where it happened, a room with an unusual sloping floor. They carried him from the room, through the bedrooms, and down the staircase. He must have been bleeding very badly, for there are splashes all the way down the steps. A handprint is where he must have touched, she said. The bloodstains remain as a permanent reminder of the murder, for no amount of scrubbing will remove them. Mrs. Bentham has tried, but they always reappear when the woodwork dries. and the murder is tied up to one of the Fleece's ghosts, known locally as Levery Coit. In her book, Oldie Elland, Lucy Hamilton says, "At midnight, the doors of the large barn at the top of Westgate opened without human energy, and there issued forth a travelling carriage with headless horses and a headless coachman, who drove furiously down Dog Lane to Old Earth, and thence returned. The coming of the spectral apparition appears to have been usually accompanied by a sudden rush of wind, however quiet the night. One night in January, a man and his wife were returning home about midnight, and just as they reached the spot where the Railway Hotel now stands, there came the gust of wind, and Levery Coit and his dreadful horses dashed by while they clung to each other in terror." Also tied up with the murder is the epitaph on the tombstone to be found at the Elland Parish Church. It reads, "Be warned, you thoughtless, near that place frequent, where precious times in sinful pleasures spent, where sinners meet and revel all night, and mix in riot, drunkenness, and fight, for there, lo, I received a fatal blow." Mr. Bentham told me, "We have never seen a ghost, but we have heard some funny noises and weird sounds in the night." One night, about 10 years ago, he was upstairs with his wife, when the dog ran barking to the top of the stairs. Mr. Bentham thought he must have left the door open, and then he hears the door catch move, as if someone was trying to get into the kitchen, then footsteps, and the door appeared to shut. A search of the building revealed absolutely nothing. "We can only think it was a ghost," said Mr. Bentham. On another occasion they heard a chair moving on the stone floor downstairs. It happened for 4 nights, and then stopped when the floor was covered in felt. "Some people might be scared stiff, but we don't worry. In fact, I'm very interested in ghosts," says Mr. Bentham. He has held the licence of the Fleece since 1949, but the pub has been run by his wife's family since 1903. Many's the time they have been surprised at the secrets given up by their ancient home. A 3-wheeled perambulator, at least 75 years old, was found in an underdrawing during alterations some years ago. It was probably made by a local blacksmith. And I actually had to Google what a perambulator was. According to Google, it's an old pushchair or an old pram. Another discovery in one of the rooms was a soda water bottle of an unusual shape, and Mr. Bentham also found an earthenware basin which was thought to be an old spittoon. All doors and windows which had been blocked in also came to light, and tucked away in drawers and apparently preserved with scented soap were some Victorian clothes in perfect condition. They included a bonnet with osprey and ostrich feathers, a black brocaded and lace coat, and a red coat corseted around the waistline. An early sewing machine and a musical box were among other finds. In fact, the Fleece is packed from top to bottom with relics from yesteryear, and its many unusual and architectural rarities have attracted attention from all over the world. Mr. and Mrs. Bentham are able to show visitors a room in the inn which has a connection with the Nazi regime. Before taking up his post as foreign minister with the Nazi party, von Ribbentrop was a champagne salesman in the country. One of the places he loved to call at was the Fleece. His favourite room was the Snug, nicknamed the Tram because of its long, thin shape. One of the customers at the time was a Mr. Fred Ormerod of 16 Bath Street, Elland. He told me, "I was in the Snug once or twice when he called and spoke to him several times. It would be about 1930. Ribbentrop seemed a friendly sort of person and talked to the company, but I can't remember whether he was popular or not. He never talked politics in those days, just general chatter, as he drank his glass of ale. I was very surprised when he came to prominence as a Nazi." The visits of the smart, friendly wine salesman are remembered by very few people now, but no one who lived through the war will forget the same person who turned into the much hated Nazi. Memories are confused about the secret passage at the inn. Mr. and Mrs. Bentham both say it exists, but claim that the entrance has been blocked up and lost. Legend has it that from the inn a flight of 52 steps leads down to the underground tunnel, which some say comes out in Elland Parish Church. Certainly it would not come as a surprise to find such a passage at the Fleece, for there is still a feeling that the ancient house has many more secrets to reveal. Its quiet exterior of elegance and charm is little indication of what lies behind the dark stone walls, or of the unusual or macabre events which have taken place there. This bit of the email seems to talk about the murder again, the murder on the stairs with the bloody handprint and the bloodstained stairs, but it does go a little bit more in depth than before. The story goes that a local man, Thomas Thornton, tried to trick a trader at the local market, but the trader was wily and realised he had been tricked, so gave chase to Thomas, who took refuge at the Fleece Inn. The trader chased Thomas upstairs, apprehended and brutally murdered him. His blood-soaked body was dragged down the wooden stairs, leaving a gruesome blood trail behind him, which was clearly visible for the next 160 years. Fleece innkeeper and diarist William Wooler, who was also the organist and choirmaster at St Mary's Church the Cross in Elland, stated in his diary that the incumbent and Reverend Christopher Atkins had told a parishioner that the Fleece Inn was a disgraceful hostelry. The good parson made sure that everyone was aware how he felt, because on Thomas's gravestone there is the following epitaph, and this is what I mentioned earlier on. I'll read it again. "Be warned, ye thoughtfulness, near the place frequent, where previous times in sinful pleasures spent, where sinners meet and revel all night, and mix in riot, drunkenness and fight. Frequent it not, nor its bad company, no, for there, lo, I received a fatal blow." Thomas Thornton was aged 27 years when he died, and he was murdered on the 11th of May 1818. His gravestone is situated at St Mary's Church, the Cross, Elland. During major alterations to the interior of the inn in 1966, the blood-stained staircase was removed and placed in storage. When further renovations were being carried out in the late 1970s, the staircase was brought out of storage and incorporated into the new bar, the Rams Bar, in the function room. A staircase leading nowhere other than the ceiling was a great feature and fascinated everyone because of the bloodstains that were clearly visible. Most of the woodwork on the stairs was refurbished, but a small area had a glass cover placed over it to preserve the stain. After another short period, when it was decided to open up and refurbish the semi-derelict upstairs room of the function room, a large opening was made in the floor and the famous staircase was resited to access the upper level. However, the new position required a much shorter staircase that turned direction midway, and the workmen cut away the extra length of stair and burned it. Unfortunately, the piece of wood that they burned was a piece stained with the blood of the murder victim 160 years earlier. The remains of the original staircase still remains, but is now carpeted. Of course, Mr. and Mrs. Bentham's account of the murder in the newspaper article is merely speculation, as the exact circumstances and logistics of the incident are not clearly recorded, although it would be mighty interesting to pull up the carpets between the sitting room and the sloping floor and the bedroom that once led directly to the top of the infamous stairs and search for bloodstains. It is actually quite a distance between the two rooms, the room with the sloping floor in the west wing and the stairs in the east wing, so there should be blood stains aplenty. And now the next part of the email seems to be Christine's own personal experiences, so let's check it out. Almost 50 years later, in 2019, I can concur with Mr. and Mrs. Bentham when it comes to the fact that the Fleece Inn is indeed a very interesting place to live. I too have heard the strange goings on in the night, and sometimes in the daytime too. Quite often, a wooden chair is quite clearly heard scraping across the stone floor of the Rams Bar function room in the dead of night when the inn is closed, locked up and alarmed. I too have experienced my dogs reacting or interacting with things that could possibly be paranormal. I have 3 small dogs who jump up inexplicably and start barking aggressively at what appears to be absolutely nothing, and quite often they rush excitedly from their beds, tails wagging, to happily greet someone who simply isn't there. What has been described as poltergeist activity is commonplace, and glasses falling from shelves, things moving around or simply disappearing are almost everyday occurrences, just a few of which are outlined below. In 2016, around October, there was a particularly active period lasting about a week, with things being disturbed, moving around, and even large heavy objects being moved from one room to another. One morning before the inn opened for business, we found a door to one of the corridors was barred. Upon forcing open the door, my husband and I found large heavy items not previously in the vicinity piled up behind the door, barring our entry. Strangely, on the same morning, we had a power out in that part of the building, and electricians attended later that day failed to find the root cause, saying, "We are baffled. There must have been some sort of power surge during the night, or something." Early one afternoon in April 2017, during the filming of TV's Most Haunted, a wooden chair came sailing through the air, narrowly missing me before bouncing off a table behind me and crashing to the floor. This was the most frightening experience I have had to date whilst living at the Fleece, particularly because I know that every person in the building at the time was fully accounted for. They were standing right in front of me when it happened. I even searched for fishing wire in case it was a very dangerous stunt they had pulled for the camera. But there was genuinely nothing there, just a broken chair, a shocked TV crew, and a very pale and shaky landlady. In September 2017, I awoke in the dead of night with a very strange feeling that someone was in the bedroom watching me. I sat up and quite clearly saw the shadow of a hunched up person sitting at the end of my bed. The shadow remained there for what seemed like ages, but was in fact only 30 seconds or so, and then faded away. October 2017 saw the commencement of a very strange ongoing phenomenon. In the first floor living accommodation, there is a long, low, twisted corridor. It's a very dark area with no window nearby to shed any light, so I fitted a glass crystal drop light fitting to brighten the area up a bit. One day, a member of staff was sitting on the floor at the opposite end of the corridor. He was painting the skirtings, when he made a short film and sent it to me with the message, "Christine, it won't stop." The film showed a single large crystal from the light fitting swinging steadily back and forth. I stopped the crystal swinging, thinking he must have knocked it somehow, but could feel the crystal pulling gently on my hand as I held it still. I let go, and it immediately resumed swinging. The same single crystal continued swinging for over a week, during which time lots of people went to see the phenomenon, but no one could explain why it was happening. I called in a paranormal investigator who set up his ghost hunting equipment near the phenomenon, and he was every bit as startled as I was when the alarms and lights on the equipment went crazy, flashing and buzzing. The activity stopped for 3 days, then it started again. The same single crystal swinging vigorously back and forth. This has continued ever since. It swings for a few days, and then stops for a few days. The longest continuous uninterrupted episode of the swinging crystal is 13 days, and as I write this, in June 2019, the blessed thing is at it again. Late in 2018, a large stainless steel glass washing machine inexplicably moved about 2 feet across the floor, blocking a doorway that was the one and only entrance into the room where it stood. Overnight on the 23rd of December 2018, a large TV in what is now the pool room came crashing down to the ground at 3:30 am. We checked the building, suspecting a burglary, but there was no intruder. However, the next day, investigation of the more than adequate TV bracket fixings to the wall indicated that the TV bracket had been physically ripped away from the wall, and what is more, the smashed up TV was not found lying in the position one would have expected it to have landed had it merely fallen away from the wall. Furthermore, just a day later, on Christmas Day morning 2018, whilst preparing the inn for opening, I saw and spoke to what I thought was my husband standing where the fallen TV once hung, only to see him emerge from the kitchen behind the bar to answer me. Disconcerting to say the least. At the time, there wasn't anyone else in the building. Quite often, I, and others, feel the sensation of being touched, as though someone is patting my back, stroking my arm, or stroking or moving my hair. I also feel that I am not alone in an empty room, being watched sometimes. This is a pleasant, warm experience, but other times it most definitely isn't pleasant at all. Strange scratchings on the bedroom wall and creaking footsteps heard coming from empty rooms are commonplace. I must state at this juncture, however, that living at the Fleece Inn is not intimidating at all. Whoever or whatever we are sharing our lovely home with is not malevolent or dangerous. In fact, we quite often feel that some of the occurrences are amusing, possibly due to a little bit of childish mischievousness, and more often than not, they make us smile. And lastly, on the 10th of September 2019, whoa, that was 10 days ago, my husband and I were woken in the early hours by what sounded like someone walking around our bedroom, opening or rattling doors and drawers. We both clearly heard mumbling voices, and my husband heard someone whispering in his ear. This went on for quite a while, until tired and exhausted, my husband shouted, "Okay, stop it now. We know you're here, now let us get some sleep." The activity subsided almost immediately, and we finally managed to go back to sleep. And that's it. We've come to the end of the email from Christine and the end of the episode. Thank you very much, Christine, for sending that in. It was very informative and really interesting. I really enjoyed reading it.